Hello everyone, my name is Potato Man, and here I attempt to explain various historical thingamajigs. Today, for my first video, I'm going to be discussing the American Revolution. Now, seeing as I am British, I have a slight tendency to be quite biased against you traitorous colonials. But I digress. I'm here to stay completely historically accurate as far as my knowledge takes me. Was there elephants? There may have been elephants. No, just to be safe, no elephants. No elephants in the Revolution, as far as I know. Anyway, American Revolution. Let's get started. Now, obviously, before we actually get into the actual revolution, we have to talk about the steps that led up to it. It isn't simply no taxation without representation. Far more complicated than that. The colonies in the Americas weren't always British. The 13 colonies were split between Britain and France, and during the 7 Years' War, Britain got those colonies from France, including New Orleans. But since it was such a big war, there was a slight little problem. Money. With such a huge war, which was essentially a world war because of how far it expanded to the Caribbean, to India, and Africa, there was a lot of money lost during this war. And since most of the war was because of those colonies in the Americas, the British thought that the people living there would probably be able to pick up the slack a bit, if you will. There was another contributing factor to revolution, which was land. You see, most of the people that came to the colonies wanted to have their own land to farm because it seemed so easy to have land. But after the 7 Years' War, the British made a number of deals with the local Native Americans, which prevented expansion by most colonials, which of course angered them. That was the whole point they came over. I'm not saying that the British weren't going to expand west. It was definitely a certainty that they were going to. It was just that a lot of the colonials that came to the colonies to farm were going to have trouble finding the land they wanted to farm. Obviously, we have to start talking about the taxes. Now, while the taxes were high, not a lot of them were actually enforced. But one of those that was enforced was the tea tax, and that started the Boston Tea Party, where, of course, the various future founding fathers and others would be dressing up in culturally insensitive clothing and dumping tea into the ocean. Sort of strange way of protesting, but it makes a lot of sense, though, if you were against the taxes without representation. It's true, they did want local elections to just choose who they wanted, as opposed to have someone appointed from London. And then they started having those little elections in various of the colonies, and many of them chose to decide to rebel. Not everybody was for the revolution, however. It was only about 40% of the population at the time. Another 40% were neutral, they didn't want any part of it, and the remainder 20% were actually in support of the British, and they were called loyalists, some of whom even joined the British Army. This included a number of slaves in the colonies who were promised freedom for fighting for the British. So in reality, the 13 stripes and the 13 stars on the flag should be closer to 10. Now, while most people say it was July the 4th, or 4th of July, that was the day the Declaration of Independence was signed, it was actually the 2nd that it was ratified. But enough about useless trivia. Let's talk about the war itself. When it first started, it seemed that the British were winning. They were defeating every battle and just about winning and completely decimating or scattering many American forces, despite the numbers that they had. This was due to a number of factors, including tactics, discipline, and the fact that the British were just better at being a well-organized army. So how do you beat a well-organized army with a mostly unorganized army? The answer was simple: guerrilla warfare. Much in the same way that the Celts defeated the Romans, the Americans could defeat the British using ambush tactics and skilled skirmishers to disrupt supply lines and formations and scouts and reconnaissance So while they were losing most battles, they were winning the war. So with numbers and ambush tactics and the fact that they were fighting from 3,000 miles away, it was no wonder that the British started losing. Now while those factors were important, the real nail in the coffin for the British control over the Americas was the French. The French provided cannons, other equipment, supplies, money, officers to train American militias and troops, and of course another 20,000 soldiers. Without that, there would probably be no America and it would still be a British colony. But this did come back to bite France in the arse later, because not only did they lose a lot of money in the 7 Years' War, they also lost money supporting the American Revolution. And on top of that, the American Revolution inspired the French people to rebel against the various monarchies. So, isn't history funny when the people back then don't know the long-term consequences of their actions? I sure don't. Ha 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 ha. Eventually, the British had to concede for those multiple factors, and the Treaty of Paris was signed, and thus in 1783 the revolution was ended, and thus was born the sovereign nation of the United States of America. The end. Thanks for watching. Be sure to share, like, subscribe, send me your firstborn, all those sorts of fun things that people tend to do on these sorts of channels. I'll be sure to send out a video whenever I feel like it. I'm not on my own schedule. I'm my own boss. I don't answer to no one. See you later.